14 people are dead, 17 wounded, and now it appears at least 2 of the 3 gunmen accounted for. The search goes on for the 3rd. Live in the news center, Doug Sovereign, KCBS.
Thank you, Doug, for some perspective on all of this. We're joined live on the KCBS Ring Central Newsline now by Chris Grollnek. He is a retired police corporal and the nation's leading expert on active shooters and domestic terrorism prevention. Chris, obviously information still rather sketchy coming out of San Bernardino. What are you taking away from these early reports?
Hey, thanks for having me on. At the very best, they have the 3 people they think. At the very worst, there's still 1 on the loose that could be a driver. I think this is going to turn out to be an exceptional case of domestic terrorism, whether it's from overseas terror brought here or whatever. As we know, active shooter events are the number 1 domestic issue for domestic terrorism in our country, and this is just takes it to the next level. The level of skill that it would take to pull off that many casualties and that many injured personnel with a 3-man coordinated assault would take months of training.
Wow. When you get in these type of situations in closed-in places, you've been through a couple of these situations. What is the best advice?
Well, Patty, I think the number 1 thing that needs to be taken away is we need to take a holistic approach from a top-down to the citizenry, right, to the constituents that actually run our country, us. Because the first responders are us. Let's say if it were me and somebody came in shooting, I would be the first responder because it takes police. There's 3 time frames that people just do not realize. If something like this occurs and you're in a location, it takes, it's over in 7 minutes. It takes police 17 minutes to get there. And by statistics, we know police will not make contact with the first victim until 23 minutes have passed. So instead of spending $100 million on new weapons and a new counterterrorism unit, shouldn't we spend $999,000 or whatever, $900,000 on the weapons and the people, and then give back some to the community to understand there's a status of fight, flight, and freeze. And unfortunately, a lot of the casualties that were no longer with us were in a stuck status of frozen because nobody ever taught them, hey, look, if you hear something, don't just think about it, respond to it, react, get out. Because these shooters, they don't want to fail. They have one thing on their mind, mass casualties, and the way to do that is they seek the weak, if you will, and they hunt the people that are stuck and that they can't move because they're frozen with fear. So if we give some gentle training and reduce that fear and say, look, if you hear something, don't wait, just leave, we could save a lot of lives.
Chris, is it safe to say that what you're advocating is, in fact, somewhat controversial, that there are even law enforcement folks out there who would say that that's not the way to go? I mean, am I right about that?
Partly, okay, and the philosophy is changing as, it's evolving as we go, because this is not something new by any means, but an active shooter is usually 1 person, 2 at the most, like we saw at Columbine. They're trying to right a perceived wrong. They're trying to get even, if you will, in their mind the best way they know how, whereas a domestic terrorism event or a terrorist event is a religious, ideological, or politically motivated objective, and they really don't care what happens. So police are saying, shelter in place because they want accountability, but what the problem with shelter in place is bullets open doors, and people that are stuck under tables are being, reducing themselves to what we learned in the 50s about nuclear fallout attacks, hide. We don't want people in a temporary state. If you're going to hide, you want to temporarily wait there for just a second to get an opening to get out, because you don't want to line your friends up against the wall and cover your eyes and your ears and say, wow, I hope for the best, because now you've just reduced yourself to, right, a sitting target. And, that's the whole thing. You want to break the cycle of these people, and the people are seeking the weak, the soft targets, the people that are stuck and can't fight back. So what I think the controversy is do you need guns or don't you need guns? And that is not something I get into, because I believe the most powerful weapon is with you all the time, and it's your mind. And if you can outthink these people, you will survive.
Chris Grollnek, thank you very much. A retired police corporal and an expert on active shooters and domestic terrorism prevention.
Catch you up on KCBS Traffic. The update is sponsored by WesternUnion.com's mobile app. Cheryl, where to start?
What went wrong, and what did they get right?
Well, first I want to compliment the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, the police department in the area. Exceptional response. The first thing that hit me when I watched it on television unfolding before I started calling my contacts and frankly, before they started calling me and some of our people to help mitigate this, I witnessed something that was almost like an evolution, if you will. And what I call this is we've never seen something exactly like this. No active shooter event is ever exactly alike. However, this trumps everything. This is what I call the new hybrid domestic terrorism. I don't care if it's ISIS-inspired or active shooter-inspired, and I'll tell you the difference. An active shooter is generally somebody that's upset. They go back to right some perceived wrong that's in their head, and sometimes they use a firearm, a knife. We saw it in Oklahoma City where the girl used a car. It doesn't matter. They just want to inflict harm or as many casualties as possible. They are only afraid of failure, and they do not want to stand up to people that will stand up back to them. So we do not advocate for guns. We do not advocate for fighting techniques. We don't teach anything like that to the general public. What we're into is talking about retraining your mind and behavioral modification of, listen, it's just like see something, say something, but it's more of a instinctual. If you hear something, we have an inherent built-in mechanism in our body, fight or flight. Most people understand that. What they forget is the forgotten F, and it's called freeze. And if you ever watch any footage, to include some of the victims here, and one thing that we will not do is one, fearmonger, and two, victim blame, because it has nothing to do with their faults. This is a tragedy. Our prayers are with the families. We just want to learn from what we have seen. And the evolution of this hybrid attack, you just witnessed a terrorist attack on domestic soil, masked as a workplace violence incident, called an active shooter. Now, if anybody's ever heard of something like that to date, I'd like to be contacted, because I know for a fact there isn't one.
The FBI has been exploring the whole possibility of this being an act of terrorism of some kind, but they're not really ready to commit to saying that particular phrase. You are saying it.
Well, what I'm saying is, you have somebody that booby traps their house. They get into a car, they go to a party and pretend to have a good time, and they get in a masked fight. They come out, and then they go back in immediately, and they inflict 14 deaths, 17 injuries in under 3.4 minutes. And some are saying 1.5 minutes, but it's 3.4 minutes. And the response time for police to get anywhere is 7 minutes, right? Or I'm sorry, for these things to end is 7 minutes. It normally takes police 17 minutes to get there and 23 minutes to reach the first victim. So when I started, this response, when I said, an outstanding shout-out goes to the sheriff's office and the police department, they happened to be doing a training exercise a few miles down the road. They were there in under 5 minutes, and these people were gone. For a qualified SWAT team, if they were to, go to the dark side, if you will, now this is a qualified SWAT team that has worked together for a number of years. You'd be hard-pressed to get 3 people and go reenact this if it were to happen just the same way and score the same amount of hits. And that's a very poor way to put it, but I'm just speaking, from an institutional perspective. To score 14 kills and 17 casualties in under 3.4 minutes, military units would have a hard time doing that, which means they have some type of training that somebody's not talking about yet. And when you open the door to the IED factory inside of their home, which was booby-trapped and wired, and a bomb-making factory, you can't help it. Explosives in the United States are near impossible to get because of regulatory, okay? So the only way you can get them is if you steal them from, say, a mining company, or you pull a Timothy McVeigh, but we have ways to make sure that's not going to happen because of fertilizer sales. So what you have is HMEs, homemade explosives. And here's somebody with the wisdom, knowledge, and power and resources to build these HMEs, homemade explosives, turn them into IEDs, improvised explosive devices, and then hope to inflict as many casualties as possible. That is not an active shooter. That is an act of straight-up terrorism, whether it's Jihadi John, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Bin Laden, doesn't matter. What we're seeing is the evolution of the new hybrid assault in America. And the reason that these are so effective, and what I'm fearful for, okay, I'm not going to say it straight that it's ISIS, but because that has political implications overseas. But what I will say, and I will commit to, is you think about the number of casualties that happened on 9/11 and how we responded. These people don't need to be that effective. These people need to hit like they did yesterday, 14 and 17, and they get news coverage from here till next week. And ISIS has not claimed responsibility. It's important to note that. However, there's a lot of ties that go towards that direction.
The other thing that's come out of this is, and talk about turning a corner, is that really for the first time that we're seeing, as far as these kind of events that we've seen, these mass shootings, is it's a husband and wife. There are now women that are involved in this kind of an operation as well.
So what an excellent point you make. We did a special recently. About a year and a half ago, I wrote a white paper, and it was talking about the coming storm of what we may see in America and how to better prepare yourself as a regular person, not carrying a gun, but as a family man with whomever with you, and something goes wrong, how to escape and how to survive it without having to be the word survival has a lot of entrails tied to it. So let's just say a way to get out safely. And we were putting this piece together, and I got called a fearmonger, every nasty word you could imagine. And in February 14th of 2015, Nova Scotia, Canada, 2 women from Geneva, Illinois, walked into the Halifax shopping center with suicide vests and guns and tried to do mass casualty. So I got the country of origin right, and I got the sex right of the perpetrators, but I got the wrong country because it was in Canada, not the United States. But people started listening after that and said, "Wow, how did you know that?" And I said, "It's not like a prophecy; it's like an evolution. And what we're seeing is the evolution of what's happening." And then, you have this mix-off in Paris, and you have all 3: bombs, guns, and people not knowing what to do. And then you have some one-off, crazy, for lack of a better term, and I never say that, but some whack job in, Colorado decide to try to, do something stupid at Planned Parenthood, and unfortunately score, victims there, and we lose track and focus and say, oh my gosh, it's all guns. Well, then a week later, it turns out it's guns, bombs, and other, plus a little, sprinkle in a little ideology, and now you have a domestic terrorism attack mixed with an active shooter, mixed with, and you just fill in the blank.